Hey friends, welcome back to the Jonathan Benaiah Podcast. I know it's been a while since you last heard from me here, and I owe you an apology for the silence. You know, the last few months have been, if I could say, beautifully busy. I've been writing, I've been back on the road, I've been in the field filming, I guess trying to keep up with life as it unfolds in wild, I'd like to say wild and unexpected ways. But I've missed this. I've missed you guys. I've missed sitting down, sharing thoughts, sharing some cool stories that my world gets to, if I could say, interface or cross paths with. And I've really missed reflecting with you. So today I thought I would, jump back on here and do a slightly different episode. I thought would ease back in with just a conversation from the heart, a reflection on some recent stories and some recent events in the world of conservation from this part of the world. And it will just be me on the podcast today, no guest. And some of the stories that I guess want to shine the light on would be one, Uganda's first ever rhino naming ceremony, which just happened just a few days ago. We'll talk about a new mountain gorilla baby born in Mgahinga Gorilla National Park. And of course, we must talk about the tragic passing of, I could say, a woman whose name was almost synonymous with compassion in the field of conservation. And that's Dr. Jane Goodall. But before we dive right in, I'd like to remind you that the Jonathan Benaiah Podcast and its sister show, the Africa Safari Podcast, are available on all major streaming platforms. What's up, my beautiful people? Welcome to the Jonathan Benaiah Podcast, a show that is wild, very wild. We are proudly Uganda's #1 conservation and tourism show, but we also benefit from a listenership from all across the African continent and the world at large. We try to put out a new episode every Sunday with discussions ranging around how to make the natural world a better place, creating awesome images, telling stories with words, wildlife films and photography, with occasional musings on sound and tech. If these topics fascinate you as much as they interest me, I promise you this podcast will have you in a spin. I do share a lot of my personal experiences, and from time to time, I'll have 1 or 2 guests on the podcast to have some very insightful discussions. So thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy your time here.
Jane, you shouldn't have given these chimpanzees names. They're your subjects. They should have numbers. Jane, you cannot talk about animals having personalities, minds, and emotions. Those are unique to us. You can't have empathy with your subjects. To be a good scientist, you've got to be objective. And to be objective, you can't have empathy. Well, I had a great teacher when I was a child, a teacher who had already taught me that what these professors were saying was absolute rubbish. That teacher, many of you have had, was my dog, Rusty. And whether you've had a dog, a cat, a guinea pig, a rabbit, a parrot, whatever it is, you know perfectly well that we are not the only beings on the planet with personalities, minds, and emotions. And gradually, science came to accept that we are part of and not separate from the rest of the animal kingdom.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Jonathan Benaiah Podcast, and let's begin with a story this week that I believe left all of us in the conservation world, if I could say, shocked, and it still is for a moment. When the news broke that Dr. Jane Goodall had passed, the world around us really went quiet. I remember that night, I was just scrolling through Instagram, And my timeline, or all I saw with each and every scroll for the next couple of days were messages of commiseration from scientists, from filmmakers, from rangers, from everyone, including school kids, because I know she was quite passionate about the kids through her project, I think called, is it Roots and Shoots or something? And you could really feel that she was truly loved by so many people, not just in the conservation world, but if I could say, you might as well say that she was really a human, and she was loved by humans from all walks of life. We actually spoke about her not so long ago, while on the road. We were filming in Kibale National Park in Uganda just recently. The same forest where, for those that have seen Chimp Empire, that's where it was filmed. And I was actually privileged to, for those that watched a little short documentary, The Chimp Empire, the Chimp Island, semantics. Yeah, for those that got to watch a short documentary, The Chimp Island, which is a story that we told celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary, you might have heard we opened with a voice, and that was Dr. Jane Goodall's voice. It was really heartwarming to have that. And Ngamba is definitely one of many sites that Dr. Jane Goodall helped establish, and ones that she continued to be actively involved in throughout her life. But anyways, back to the Kibale story. While we were in Kibale forest, someone on the crew brought it up and talked about how Dr. Jane Goodall's early work in Gombe, at Gombe Stream in Tanzania, where her chimpanzee work actually began, and where I might say the human race as we know it as humans began to develop a much deeper understanding of chimpanzees. It's where everything just seems to have started. We were sitting in the forest, and we all just thought for a moment that all of us as conservationists, as storytellers, as filmmakers, as rangers, as scientists, sitting there in the forest in Kibale filming the chimpanzees, that moment just dawned on all of us that our work in Gombe went on to inspire an entire generation of, if I could say, change movers, entire generation of researchers, including many of us who've been fortunate to work in forests like Kibale, in forests like Budongo, in forests like the Chambura Gorge, which is a forest that is very central to my heart. It's a forest that we shot the Sempa film, Lost Chimpanzees of Chambura, which went on to win an award and several, if I could say, notable mentions and selections all across the world. So chimpanzees for me, I love gorillas, but chimpanzees for me, I believe, they've always been, if I could say, a much more fascinating species for me. It's incredible each time we are with them, and just looking back at the work that Dr. Jane Goodall began, that work seemed to mark out a path for so many of us that now work in the conservation space. And this conversation then feels heavier when the news of her passing just hit ripples all around the world. Dr. Jane Goodall changed the way we see animals, and I think that's one thing that she will be so heavily remembered for. And perhaps not just animals, but also how we see ourselves today. She, through her work, she seemed to, if I could say, blur the line between humanity and the natural world. You know, we often seem to separate ourselves or want to distance ourselves from the natural world. We seem to say that we live here and nature lives somewhere else. And for even the most experienced travelers, usually when they are coming to the African continent to experience the natural world, it often, more often than not, feels like they are venturing out into a totally different world, and yet forgetting that humanity is actually just one of the many elements that are part of the natural world. And Dr. Jane Goodall's work really helped, if I could say, blur that line between us and nature, just reminding us that we are one and the same. Dr. Jane Goodall gave a voice to empathy in science. She really made it important for us to feel and for us to appreciate that species, animals, especially the chimpanzees, really have emotions, really have personalities, and that it was important for us to care. Her legacy, I believe, is not only about the many achievements that mapped her journey. I believe her legacy also points me, and I guess many people like myself who are passionate about the natural world, about what we must do after she's left, and what is most important for us to do after she's left. And as I've always said, I feel like one of the most important things that we must do after that she's now gone is that is to remember that conservation shouldn't really rely on, if I could call them, proverbial superheroes. And I could give the example of the three primates. You have Dr. Jane Goodall, who worked with the chimpanzees, who's now passed. You did have Dr. Dion Fossey, who worked with the mountain gorillas. You have Professor Galdikas, who is, I believe, the most researched, who's done the most research on the orangutans, which is another great ape. And the three ladies are called the primates. The primates. So we've since lost two, and we're left with Professor Galdikas, I believe. And of course, it's not just in the primates. There's so many other species in which many people seem to be pioneering, if I could call it, being pioneers in solving some of our planet's most pressing problems. But I believe, as I said, conservation today shouldn't really rely on proverbial superheroes. It should really be driven by each and every one of us. And most importantly, it should be driven by communities, by the people who live with the wildlife every day, the people who, I believe, most understand the wildlife, people who have the wildlife walk into their gardens, people, if I could say, who have ancestral connection to these wild spaces, wild places. I believe those should lead conservation as we look forward. It shouldn't be superheroes coming from miles and miles away to offer solutions. As I've said on the podcast so many times, I believe her passing should remind us that the communities, the people, the hosts that invite us into their spaces together with their wildlife should lead conservation. And that's the kind of future that I want to hope that Dr. Jane Goodall, who's no longer with us, would have wanted. One where I say conservation is shared and it's not saviored, if I could use that as a phrase, and I'm kind of rhyming there. Anyway, so for those that don't know, Dr. Jane Goodall started out studying chimpanzees, but over the years, for us that have been following her very closely and observing her career, we've seen her fight for even other greater causes, especially those that affect mankind. She stood up for indigenous voices. As I said earlier, very, very involved in the youth and, if I could say, kids, through her project, we call it Roots and Shoots. Very passionate about women, very passionate about those who live beside forests and other wild places. And she will be dearly, dearly missed. Yeah. What else? What other thought could cross my mind? Yeah, I believe she understood something that still challenges the conservation world today. And this is that you cannot save wildlife without being empathetic. It's impossible for us to save wildlife without feeling a sense of empathy. And this is a sense of empathy not just to the wildlife, but also to the people who, as I like to call them, are neighbors to the wildlife. And I want to believe that in her passing, this won't be the end of her story, because she leaves us with a very important question. That's the question of how we are able to use the empathy that we all carry. I believe, I want to hope, the empathy that we all carry deep within our hearts, how we are able to use this to make our world a better place. It's a sad time, but it's also a very hopeful time, because she was a symbol of what it is that as a human race we can achieve positively if we decide to either combine our efforts or even offer small contributions to bettering not just our natural world but our world at large. So she'll be dearly missed, but always remembered. Now, another story that has been on my mind is Uganda's Rhino translocation project. And just recently we had, I believe, Uganda's very first rhino naming ceremony at the Ziwa Rhino Sanctuary. Now, for those that don't know, Ziwa Rhino Sanctuary is, if I could say, controlled setting where rhinos have been bred for slightly over 2 decades, I believe now. And it's a beautiful story that shows how rhinos went extinct in Uganda, and just a few rhinos were brought to Ziwa several years ago, and these have now been able to reproduce and breed and bring Uganda's rhinos now to, I think, about slightly over 40 individuals today, which is in itself a very beautiful story. Yeah, so as I said, Uganda held its very first ever rhino naming ceremony not so far ago. Actually, it happened on World Rhino Day. And I think about 17 rhinos were given names on that day. I remember that morning quite vividly. We were on the road in a safari jeep with some colleagues, and we just started chatting about the planned reintroduction of rhinos back to Ajai Wildlife Reserve, which is a protected area not so far away from the Murchison Falls National Park. That's in the west, in a place we commonly call the west of the Nile. That's in northwestern Uganda. And during this trip, we were all just having a chat about what it will be like when the rhinos eventually return to Ajai Wildlife Reserve, which is a place that they are reported to have been before rhinos went entirely extinct in Uganda. So my opinion has always been that for this translocation work to be successful, we must and we have to replicate the same model that has succeeded at the Ziwa Rhino Sanctuary, where you basically have each and every rhino group. I think they're called a crush. That's a name given to a group of rhinos. Each rhino group has to be monitored 24/7 by a dedicated team of rangers working in shifts. Without that, I believe it's quite possible to lose all the gains that we've made in nearly 2 decades in just a few weeks or just a few days. And I believe it's that approach of monitoring them 24/7 that's ensured that Uganda has not had any rhino poached in very, very many years. So I'm really looking forward to when the rhinos are eventually translocated to Ajai. And just following that story, and hopefully everything goes successfully. Now, something else fascinating also happened last week. The Smithsonian magazine, which is a beautiful magazine for those that don't know, I encourage you to keep tabs with it. The Smithsonian also ran a story about the rhino translocation in Uganda and the rhino naming ceremony in particular. And it reminded me of an even lesser known chapter in history. For those that don't know, between 1909 and 1910, the 26th president of the United States, that's Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt as he's quite commonly known, he had his famous African expedition just a few, I don't know if it was weeks or months after he had just ended his term or tenure as the 26th American president. And he journeyed to Africa on this famous African expedition. And there's so many books that have been written about it. There's his own book, African Trails, which I encourage you to go and read. There's another beautiful book that's been written by a professor called, I think, Darren Lund. It's called The Naturalist. Very beautiful, very, very beautiful book that tells his story more from a conservation point of view, which is, which I don't want to spoil for those listening. I encourage you to look for the book. But anyway, as part of that African expedition, Roosevelt came and hunted rhinos here in Uganda in a place called Rhino Camp. So as part of the trip, he did a bit of hunting in Kenya. I think they started out in Kenya, they came to Uganda, and also into the Sudan, which I believe now is present-day South Sudan, that area. But in Uganda, as I said, he came specifically to hunt rhinos. Now, some of the rhinos that Roosevelt hunted actually ended up in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., for those that have been. And I believe that one of the rhinos that he shot is currently on display in the mammalian section at the Natural History Museum in D.C. in the U.S. And while this story often paints Roosevelt or always crucifies him for, if I could call it, big game hunting, sport hunting as it's known today, in a beautiful twist of fate, if I could say, the data from that old Smithsonian expedition that Teddy Roosevelt did, I've read that is now being used by modern scientists to help the Ugandan government in the process of restoring or returning rhinos back to Ajai. And largely how this data is being used is to help restore the habitat in Ajai to what it was like before. So you have things like some of the rodents that were in Ajai at the time, many of which have gone extinct today, things that are often not talked about. They have all the data in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in DC, and it's helping with all this conservation and translocation. It almost gives you a starting point to if I could say, kickstart your translocation process. You're basically not guessing. You're trying to return these rhinos to a place that they once quite successfully thrived in, but also creating more or less close to the same environment that they once lived in so many years ago before they went extinct. Now, Rhino Camp itself has since become a refugee settlement, for those that don't know, which is basically a shadow of its former glory, as we tend to say. But it's an area that's steeped in very, very deep history, and it's something that I think all of you listening would very much be, I guess, I might say fascinated about as an interesting story. I'm actually plugged into a really, really exciting project around the Roosevelt Smithsonian Adventure, but I can't share as much yet, unfortunately. And it really looks like a very, very dope, a very, very cool project. And maybe at an opportune moment, I will be able to share a little more about it. But generally, I just look forward to the day that rhinos walk again in Ajai. But it's not just about moving the rhinos. It's about reclaiming ecological heritage. It's about ensuring that we are able to keep them alive. And it still must be said that naming and translocating rhinos isn't an end in itself. It's only just the beginning. I believe that the real conservation will happen quietly. It will be in form of long hours, day and night, as rangers patrol under the harsh sunlight and the moonlight in the night. It will be in form of how communities unite to safeguard this really, if I could say, vital resource. It will be in the form of how governments stay committed to fund and support the conservation of these rhinos, especially after the cameras leave, after the press conferences, after those beautiful events that they host with suits and ties. I believe the real conservation work happens when all of this is done. And I hope it will be a success. All right, let's just moving on a much lighter note. As I hinted earlier, just a few days ago, I had I found myself back in the Mgahinga Gorilla National Park on another beautiful assignment, and this particular one was, I say, quite different. You know, I always tell people that you get to track mountain gorillas. I'm fortunate to track gorillas quite. If I could say often, I've had quite a number of gorilla trackings, but none of the visits is ever the same. And it might sound cliche, but it actually truly is. Each and every moment is different. Now, in this particular visit, just there in the mist, as we call it, gorillas in the mist, it actually gets misty. The forest gets misty, and I think that's where the common phrase "gorillas in the mist" comes from. And a beautiful film has been done, I think, with that title. But anyway, right there in the forest, as you'd hear the leaves chatter, I had the privilege of filming what I believe is still the youngest mountain gorilla in the world to date, because I don't think I've seen any news of any new birth ever since that particular birth, either in Uganda, Rwanda, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this would be the world's youngest mountain gorilla to date that is known. And she had just been born, I believe, just slightly over a week before we were in the park filming. And it's really hard to describe the feeling of being there. You're basically standing there. Of course, your camera is rolling. You're trying to capture as much of the moments as you can. Your heart is pounding because the clock is ticking down very fast. You only have a very small window of time to share with the mountain gorillas, obviously, because of the conservation, the delicate conservation that is carried out to ensure that we aren't stressing them too much. And then during all this, if I could say, tense exchange of emotion, you notice this tiny hand, this beautiful hand, and it's small, it's wrinkled, it's just a perfect hand. It's gripping on its mother's fur, and it's holding on so tightly as if its entire life depends on it, as if it's holding so tightly onto a world that could drift away. So it was such a beautiful thing to see. And then just around the baby and the mother, you would see the rest of the family seemingly standing in watch, or they were feeding, but you could really get a sense that they were very, very much alert. All the adult mountain gorillas in the group seemed to be keeping an eye out for each and every movement that we made, each and every sound that we made. You would see them look around, and especially the silverback. You'd see the sheer muscle, and you'd really see that commanding face, commanding eye whenever he turned, as he tightly guarded the mother and the little one. Such a very beautiful thing to see. And for me, I believe it's one of the most protective, tender moments that I've ever witnessed in the wild. And I've actually seen quite a few with so many species: antelopes, lions, chimpanzees. I actually have not been fortunate to experience like a very recent birth. I've filmed quite a number of baby chimps, but not as young. Yeah, so for me, this was really, really, really tender, really, really beautiful. And that baby gorilla for me isn't just a statistic. For people that do wildlife censuses, it might just be a statistic. But for me, it reminds me that life keeps trying. It reminds me that even in the smallest ways, even in the smallest, if I could say, in the most fragile forms, life just keeps trying. It's, I would like to say, a very delicate way that nature uses to remind us that a species can return from the brink of extinction. And this is a species that not so long ago could have been entirely lost. Shouldn't there have been, if I could say, critical conservation efforts to return it to the numbers that we have today? And it's a beautiful, beautiful conservation story. It's one that I really enjoy to tell time and time again. And in recent times, I believe this might have been one of my favorite wildlife experiences. And I've experienced quite a number. But this was very, very beautiful. And yeah, what else thought process could cross my mind as I actually talk about that? It actually made me think that everything, how would I phrase this? It seemed to be a small moment, a small baby holding on to its mother with this little hand. But it also seemed to hold true that for that baby to survive, you need, maybe let me just look back to my commerce class. You needed a number of factors to remain constant. Okay, ceteris paribus, as we used to call it in school. You need peace in the region. You need a dedicated team of scientists, rangers, and conservationists to keep protecting. You need funding, which is a very important subject in conservation. I believe one of the most pressing subjects in the world of conservation, the access to finance. But you also need the continued protection of its habitat. And most importantly, you need a very good relationship with the communities that share borders with these wild places where wild mountain gorillas still roam today. It almost seems like a miracle, but it is in such great weight still a huge, a fresh responsibility for those involved in conservation to ensure that this little one grows on to become a mother and have its own babies, or grows on to become the silverback one day. Yeah, so that was a beautiful small story. I've not shared as much content from that particular trip, but on my Instagram, if you go, I think I have a small clip on there of the little baby. And maybe as I end this particular episode, my mind drifts towards, if I could say, a world intention. As you have this beautiful story of rhinos, you have the beautiful story of the mountain gorillas. As we celebrate these stories of rebirth, as we celebrate these stories of restoration, of renewal, the world around us seems to feel increasingly heavy. You have wars raging on in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which unfortunately are not getting, if I could say, the weight of media attention as places like Ukraine, as Gaza. And there was all across the world, which is a very sad thing to hear and see. You often read about millions of people being displaced. You have families being torn apart. Many lives upended. And it's here that I must think again quite often about Dr. Jane Goodall again, remembering her not just as a conservationist, but also as a messenger of peace. Because, Dr. Jane Goodall always reminded us that peace isn't separate from conservation. Those two worlds almost have to intertwine, peace and the conservation of our planet, or more or less the more or less move in marriage, if I could say. When we wage war on each other, we also wage war on the planet. And she often said that when we wage war on each other, we also wage war on the planet. And that's actually the rain beginning to pour, which I guess is my signal to wind this episode up. Yeah, but what I was just saying is that conflict destroys not just the cities, it also silences forests. It makes conservation very hard, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, where you're really, really relying on, if I could say, boots on the ground, as we call them, to protect these conservation areas. War, conflict, uncertainty, instability starves rangers, it scatters wildlife. It actually makes conservation very, very hard. And this week, it had me reflecting about the fact that even in the crucible of conflict, you still have people out there doing their work to protect the natural world. You still have people who refuse to give up on our natural world. And my heart often goes out to such people who often go unnoticed. But yeah, my heart goes out to each and every one of you. We really appreciate all the beautiful work that you guys continue to do, especially in times when you'd have so many excuses to not do that kind of work. And to each and every one of you listening from places where peace may feel distant right now, my hearts, and I guess the hearts of those listening, are with you. We can only wish that healing comes to your land. We can only wish that your skies clear up. And also importantly, we wish that your children get to experience normal and calm lives again. It's very sad to have children trapped in conflict, in wars, and this instability that's happening all around the world. So although largely this is a conservation platform, this is a conservation podcast, I thought I would end with that. I thought it would be, as we remember Dr. Jane Goodall, as we reflect on the work that she did and the life that she lived, I thought it was worth mentioning that, we are humans first. Before we become conservationists, before we become all these beautiful careers that we choose to eventually follow, we are humans first. And the peace that we wish for our wildlife, the peace and calm that we wish for our wild spaces is and should be the same peace that we must wish for each and every one of you living in war-torn areas at the moment. And yeah, I think that will mark the end of this particular episode. So that's where we are, between loss and renewal, between grief and, I'd like to say, hope. If my reflections today resonated with you, please share this episode, drop a thought, or just take a moment take a quiet moment to listen, not just to this podcast, but head out and listen to the natural world around you. It always has a calming, it always has a healing, it always has, I could say, a rejuvenating effect, especially for those that have the opportunity to experience it. Those of you who aren't waking up to bombs, those of you who aren't waking up to political instability, if you have that opportunity to head out in the natural world and sit and listen and just reflect. As we already said, the podcast is available on all major streaming platforms. We are available everywhere you access your podcasts. You can find us on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio for those tuning in the US. You can also find us on TuneIn, Pandora, Castbox, Deezer, and several other platforms. Those listening on Apple Podcasts, please remember to leave a star rating before you leave. That really helps with the algorithm. And one very good thing is that it's very free of charge. So please do it. If you'd like to make a contribution to the conversation or send in a question in the future, you can email me directly at any of the email addresses in the show notes below. I've left those email addresses there. And until next time, I pray that your paths cross gentle waters and that you get to experience your own healing moment from our natural world. I've been your host, Jonathan Benaiah, and this has been the Jonathan Benaiah Podcast. Love